and welcome to lecture number 2. Instead of giving you a lecture on climate change as promised last week, we're rather going to do natural resources and environmental pollution today. There will be some slides that you already know from the last lecture, because the last one was more an introductory session to get you accustomed to the problem. Now we're going to dive into all those problems a little bit deeper before we're going to jump into solutions or other background information. Not next week, because next week is climate change, but afterwards. So before we go into really those topics of resource scarcity and environmental pollution, let's get some definitions straight, because we're using, especially in the last lectures already, the word sustainability quite a lot. But even if you ask professors, researchers, people involved with the TU Clausthal, which is supposed to be a sustainability university, you get very, very different definitions of sustainability. So the first question is, what is sustainability? And since I finally have an audience compared to the last semesters, 2 or 3 approaches to define sustainability. Come on, we're recording. So I'm not going to blame you for like any, it's just like, come on, give me something to work with. Again, please. Okay, so using things that you have as long as possible to prevent wasting resources. Come on. You're already looking at me that intensively. Give me something. So minimizing the waste of resources that we already used. Okay, yep, another dimension. And a third one. Okay, reusing, repairing things that you already have that have been produced. Yep. What you describe now are maybe parts of sustainability. It's more like, how do you enable sustainability? Because you're thinking in the way of doing things, which is not wrong, not at all. But it's this way of, what can I do to be more sustainable? You're describing things you can do to achieve the goal, but you're trying to avoid defining what this word is. You're describing actions to achieve the thing that you're now trying to avoid to define. So what is sustainability? Not how do you achieve it, but what is it? I mean, it's a trick question, because there are probably hundreds of definitions for sustainability. So I'm not going to torture you anymore. There are so many definitions. We'll come back to this problem when we talk about the circular economy, because there was once a paper that found 117 definitions of the circular economy 6 years ago. And I guess there are probably even more definitions of sustainability. One of the most simple definitions is now highlighted on the screen, which is developments that meets the needs of the present. So what do we need now, without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs? So very, much broader than how do I achieve sustainability. So by taking care of my clothes and not throwing them away when they're still usable, is essentially one thing to achieve. The same goes for separating trash properly, so that we can use the resources longer, or repairing and sharing things. All of those go into the same direction of enabling sustainability, but this being one of the definitions what sustainability is. In the exam, I'm not going to ask you to repeat this definition by heart. You can also try to find other definitions that resonate more with you. It's just one of the definitions that is quite short and also intuitive. So how can you survive and have a nice life without compromising the life of your potential children? And this concept of sustainability is not really that new. It actually goes back to 1713, where a German guy called Hans Carl von Carlowitz thought about ways of making more sustainable or to approach forestry from a more sustainable perspective. Because if I have a forest and I cut down more trees per year, then other trees like start to grow and then fill those places, and at some point I don't have a forest anymore. So the very intuitive approach is to not cut down more trees than grow back in a certain period of time. Otherwise, I'm running out of trees. So this concept is quite simple. You could also use this analogy that I think I used in the teaser presentation, where I said, look, if you have a box full of sand for children to play in, and if you shit in that sandbox and throw sand out of this box left and right, at some point you don't have a sandbox to play around with anymore. And it's pretty much the same concept here. And this has been known since 1730, where Karlowitz first put this into writing, but obviously people have thought about this way before. But this is like one of the first times where people actually thought about this. And I'm not listing a German example here because I am from Germany. This is actually among the first written sources that we can find on sustainability in the modern age, excluding stuff from, I don't know, the Bible or stuff. So the idea is to continuously use things in a sustainable manner, whether it's just particular resources like forest and wood, or stuff in a more general way. And sowing and planting of trees had to be regarded as a natural duty of every landowner in order to stop the destructive, over-exploitative exploitation of natural resources. Is something that a guy called John Evelyn even came up quite a while before Karlowitz. It was just not phrased in that sentence of sustainability as we know it, but it also boils down to pretty much the same thing. So we're now almost 400 years into the idea of there is a limited thing in a finite system, let's maybe not overuse it. And still, we somehow didn't really grasp that concept very well so far. So Karlowitz coined this term of sustainability in a time where we had very, very different problems than we have now. There, they were very much focused on wood for using it for mining or to build ships. But nowadays, it's just like some other resources. You can just substitute the resources. Something that they also faced in that time is a massive growing population. So in the 1700s, we've been just like 0.6 billion people. Nowadays, it's about 8 billion people, and we're going towards 9 and 10 billion people by 2050. They had 0.6 billion. That's quite cute. And in 1800s, they already had 1 billion, and now 2000s, 21st century, we're like at 8 billion or so. There was a massive growth in the population, which also raised the question, how do we feed all those people? What do they do? And we had the industrial revolution in between that required a massive amount of resources to do what the industrial revolution was supposed to do, producing a lot of things. So first it was a lot of revolving around wood, coal, and things that you can mine and then process in factories to create goods. But later it became more general to the problem that we now have with respect to resource scarcity. So this is a context where sustainability first came up in the modern age. Now we're still facing the pretty much same problem, just in a different context. Sustainability is very closely related to the concept of biocapacity. I think I mentioned that last week very briefly when we talked about the Earth Overshoot Day, if I'm not mistaken. There is some minor nodding, very good. And biocapacity is a locally available carrying capacity of the ecosystem for generating resources and absorbing waste. So how much can I take out of the ecosystem of our planet, and how much waste can I throw in it without in a given time frame without breaking the system. So if you think about a forest, how much wood can I take out of a forest, and how much trash can I throw into a forest without the forest ecosystem breaking down? If I remove 100% of the trees, there is no forest left. If I throw I don't know, various tons of nuclear waste into that forest, I probably also don't have a forest anymore. So somewhere in between 0 and a shitload of nuclear waste is how much the biocapacity of this forest is in terms of absorbing waste, or in terms of how much wood can be retrieved from that forest without breaking the ecosystem. So that's the biocapacity in very simple terms. You can use that for enclosed ecosystems like a forest or a city or a national park, or you can also enlarge it or extend it to the idea of a whole planet. So how much can I take out and how much waste can I put in without breaking the system? Another term very closely related there is a so-called ecological footprint. It's for a particular population defined as the total area of productive land and water ecosystems required to produce sufficient resources and assimilate waste. So we're 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 people now, plus myself, it's 10. How much space do we need to be fed? How much space do we need to get the water, to absorb all the trash that we're producing? You might have heard of this idea of the CO2 footprint, like how much CO2 equivalents are you causing in a given time frame. The ecological footprint being a little bit broader, not just like how much damage or how much things you need from a CO2 perspective, but rather like food, water, shelter, everything that you need to not die. How much space do you need? A little bit more complicated to calculate than the ecological footprint. That's also why it's less popular, because the CO2 footprint has something, it gives you a number that you can easily calculate. It gives you something to work with, while the ecological footprint is more difficult. And we'll come to that part, like how can you quantify that in, I think it's like the 5 or 6, where Anand is going to talk about so-called life cycle assessments, where you can quantify the damage that you do to society. You can quantify how many resources you need to grow a potato, or how you can calculate whether it's more sustainable to drive an electric vehicle for 200,000 kilometers or drive an internal combustion engine car for 200,000 kilometers. What are the relevant parameters to make that decision? It's all connected to the ecological footprint. The most sustainable thing, and this is going to be a repeating theme of this lecture, is to not consume anything. I'm not saying you should just now move into the forest and live under a dead tree. Like, please do that if you want to. I'm not going to stop you. But the point is, everything that you consume, everything that someone tries to sell you to be more sustainable, but still consumes resources, is not the most sustainable thing to do. If you have a nice set of clothes and you don't need anything else on top, it's not more sustainable to buy another trousers or another pair of socks just because someone tells you this is the most sustainable socks. If you have everything that you need and you don't need more, then don't consume more. This is the most sustainable thing you can do. If I don't need a car, it's less sustainable to buy a Tesla if I don't need a car. If I can live without a Tesla, that's fine. That's more sustainable than using a Tesla. And it's pretty much true for all the other things that are related to resource consumptions, but are rarely promoted as a sustainable option, because if you don't consume things, it's very hard to make money off this. Which business model evolves around not consuming things? Someone has an idea, please let me know, but those are very rare to maybe even non-existing. There is no money in not consuming. Besides like some very weird gambling schemes maybe. But from like base economic perspective, if you don't consume, you're not really interested to the economic system that we have right now. And we'll get back to this again and again and again and again and again. And that very nicely links now to the problem of dwindling resources. Because if we have one planet, one system of finite resources, because we do not have indefinite resources on one planet, would be weird. We can just extract as many resources as we want from this planet. It's a one planet, one system. There's a certain amount of water, a certain amount of iron, a certain amount of uranium, whatever, and it's fixed. We don't have more. There's not really any extra stuff coming from somewhere else. So it means if we start to consume and extract those resources, at some point we're going to run out of those resources. Some of these resources are partially renewable. We talked about forests. If I cut down a tree now, there's a good chance that another tree will grow in a given period of time. You can see this outside of our nice lecture room right now. Most of the trees has been cut down due to the thing that is in German called Borkenkäfer. I don't know the English name. I don't want to know the English name. And now they're trying to reforest and to regrow various trees, but it takes time, but it is, you can grow it back within a certain amount of time, given some assumptions. But not all of those resources that we use on a daily basis can be recovered on that level. We can use resources like iron and then try to recycle as much as possible, so not throwing it into waste. But the amount of iron ores that we have on this planet is limited. Once we used all of them, we're done. We don't even have to use all of them. At some point, it just becomes infeasible to extract the remaining stuff that is still left there. This is one of the major problems, for example, with oil. There might be quite a lot of oil left in the ground, but if you need, how do you phrase this? Essentially, 1 liter of oil or 1 kilogram of oil or whatever gives you a certain amount of energy. You need more energy to extract 1 liter of oil than it gives you, then it becomes quite pointless. And you can maybe work around that, saying, look, okay, I get some energy from the sun because I need that oil for some other reasons, not for its energy purpose, but you're still getting into this problem. Some resources are just really hard to get to, really hard to extract. It's a huge amount of work and resources going into getting this last gram of iron, oil, uranium, whatever. So there is at some point a break even where you still have resources, but where it's still like pointless to extract them. This is like one of the major problems that we're facing right now. So point number 1, we have a finite system, resources are limited. Point number 2, even if we have some resources left, at some point we have a tipping point where it's more difficult to extract those resources, where it consumes more resources that we have than we gain from it. So the cost-benefit ratio becomes negative at some point. And if you have a limited system of limited resources, people start fighting over those resources, because who gets this? The resources that we still have. This is not really a new phenomena, as we discussed last week, because we've been fighting wars over resources for quite a while now. Could be water, could be oil, could be forests, could be anything else, but we have been fighting wars for resources for quite a while. The US being a very famous participant in wars somehow related to oil-rich countries, but this has happened for several thousand years now. And you can call it a resource war, you can call it a distribution problem, you can call it a conflict for resources. It doesn't really make a difference if you boil it down to people fighting over who gets the last stuff remaining or who gets a fair share of something. Because if you think about water, it's one of the most relevant resources that exist on this planet. You can think about rivers, where someone builds a dam further up the river, so this person can control how much water goes down the river. People at the lower parts of the river might not get their fair share of the water anymore. And whoever controls the dam up the river is essentially in charge of the river. You can let the river flow as normal, or if there is a drought, you just close the dam and there is no water down below, and your neighbors might become quite pissed. So one of the things that already caused quite a lot of conflict in Egypt with the Nile, or in Israel with the, what is it called? Is it Jordan, the river that's going through Israel? Think so. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Long story short, North African rivers being a very good example here, but also rivers in other parts of the world. I think China, India, and Pakistan having some fights or some disagreements over a quite large water source over there, and water just being like the very plain and simple example here, because you have a river, if you stop it, then it's gone away. The same is true for other things. Last week we talked about farmland becoming a scarce resource because climate change makes it more difficult, or like reduces the amount of farmland we have. We're polluting the rest of it. Then we have other things like desertification and so on and so on. So who's supposed to use the remaining farmland that we still have to grow food? Usually it's the entity that is the most powerful. But essentially, all of those just being examples for conflicts about resources. The more we fuck up our planet, the more prominent it's going to be to have conflicts over resources. Could be actual wars, but conflicts in all kinds of dimensions going to make our life much harder. So oil being one example, water being another example, building dams, we talked about that. So essentially who controls the dam is controlling who's suffering a drought or who not. And you can extend that to any kind of resource, some being less prone to those kind of conflicts because they are available and not really threatened to dwindle anytime soon, and others are like very, very seriously threatened. And one part, or one reason why they are threatened, is essentially environmental pollution. We talked about the farmland again and again and again. Could be because we're also doing research on sustainable and resilient farming. So I will bring that topic up again and again. But it's also like a very good example because it is related to environmental pollution, to dwindling resources, because it's a resource and it also suffers from climate change. I made the mistake of showing the definition already. Everyone has a gut feeling that what environmental pollution is, and that it's probably not that great if you pollute the environment. But what is environmental pollution? Similar to sustainability, everyone thinks like, yeah, sure, sustainability is being more sustainable, or it's this or that. But we're in this foundational course to get these definitions straight. So what is environmental pollution? What are important aspects of the definition of environmental pollution? Don't look at the ground, don't look at your desk, just talk to me. There is no wrong answer. So one part being so environmental pollution being, I'm just repeating for the recording, to put toxic materials, toxic waste into the environment. Further aspects of this toxic waste that is not supposed to be present in large quantities in our environment. What else? Come on, I'm not going to shoot anyone. Is it just about toxic waste, or have you ever felt bad about throwing a plastic cup away instead of it into a trash bin? Are you all innocent people who never ever felt guilty of any type of environmental pollution? Should I now start picking names? Notebook number Z. The environment is not just environment, it has different dimensions: air, water, soil. Okay. Last row in the middle.
made it public or any other places, and all of these small actions contribute to the pollution of the environment.
So it's not just toxic stuff, it's also just resources that we're wasting. We're getting somewhere. Look, why are you scared to talk to me? We're getting somewhere. Okay, I'm not gonna, I keep the rest of the torturing for later, so now we're just gonna move on to the one of the many definitions of environmental pollutions. For all the definitions that I will ever tell you in this lecture, there are also other definitions. Those are just the ones that we deem to be most suitable for this course. And for pollution, we have the following one. Pollution, or also called environmental pollution, is the addition of any substance, solid, liquid, or gas, we've got there, or any form of energy such as heat, sound, or radioactivity, we didn't have this one, to the environment at the rate faster that it can be dispersed, diluted, decomposed, recycled, or stored in some harmless form. We talked about the biocapacity before because it plays a crucial role in this environmental pollution part. If I can disperse, dilute, or like somehow absorb it at a sufficient rate, then it doesn't really cause a problem. But I go beyond that rate of the biocapacity, then I suddenly have a problem. The major kinds of pollution usually classified by environment are air pollution, water pollution, and land pollution. So it's not like you didn't know all of those things. There were some minor things there, but you got most of these things right. So next time, more courage. We talked about this before. And also, we talked about this before in what kinds of forms of pollution we can have. So last week, I talked to you about the picture on the left, where they just dumped trash into the fjords of Greenland, because if you cannot see it anymore, there is no trash. You also have these large landfills all over the place, usually not within Europe, because we're tending to ship our trash away to other continents like Asia or Africa. And then if we don't see it anymore, it's not our problem anymore. And then people in those continents dig to the trash that we put there to make like some minimum wage or below minimum wage money to just survive. We also talked about environmental pollution in the terms of fossil fuel-based pollution, especially air. Last week, 7 out of the 10 dirtiest European coal plants are located in Germany. And in the teaser lecture, we also talked about our ingenious ways of dealing with nuclear waste. There's a very lively discussion about nuclear energy being either among the most sustainable sources of energy or the least sustainable sources of energy. Not going to dig into that in this lecture, but rather focusing on the fact that nuclear energy, no matter how you use it, leaves you with some kind of nuclear waste. And so far, we've been not really geniuses when handling that waste. So in Germany, we decided to put them in some barrels and then dump them into a large hole. At some point, we noticed, oh, this hole fills with water, and it's not really suitable to handle nuclear waste at all. Now we're looking for a new hole to dump it in, but we haven't made any relevant progress in the last 20 years or so. Before, we had the genius idea of putting it into barrels and then just dumping it into the Atlantic Ocean or any other ocean that you can think of. The problem being, first of all, we forgot where we dumped them. The second problem being, we dumped them in barrels that were not made to sustain salt water for a very long time. So now there are thousands of barrels of nuclear waste that are probably leaking into our ocean. So I can imagine better ways of dealing with trash than we did in the past. And from those 2 generations that profited from cheap nuclear energy so far, because nuclear energy wasn't really harvested in a productive manner since the, I don't know, 1950s, 60s, 70s, there's like a lot of waste left just from those 2 generations. And this is not even accounting for the fact that we're not using it on a global level on a large scale. We're just using it in mostly developed countries because it costs a shitload of money to just build a nuclear reactor and then run it. It's not very cheap. And just from those 2 generations, we have a lot of trash left. And for those 2 generations, we need 40,000 generations we have to deal with the waste that we accumulated so far. It's not really about the amount of waste, but rather the fact that it takes quite a long of time until nuclear waste becomes not harmful anymore. But the more waste we accumulate, the more nuclear waste, the more space we need to store this. And right now we don't have on this whole planet a place to permanently store nuclear waste. We have some temporary places on various places on this planet, some like in Germany where we dumped stuff in a hole and now notice this hole is not really made for this. Now we have to get it back out. But so far, if I'm not mistaken, and nothing has changed in the last few weeks, we do not have on this whole planet a permanent space to store stuff because it's quite unpopular as a politician to say, look, you guys elected me, and now I'm going to argue in favor of storing all the nuclear waste in your backyard. This is not very popular, and one of the reasons why we don't have such a place yet. Plastic is another disease of our society that we are really bad at handling. There are two plastic bottles that I can see there. There's yet another one. There's probably a metal one. I have a plastic cup over here. There's another plastic bottle without someone monitoring it. So we're using plastic for everything and everywhere, and we're really bad at managing the trash, managing the waste. The good thing is plastic waste is not as toxic as it like nuclear waste. The problem is that we're using it on a much, much larger scale. So there's so much more than all the nuclear waste that we have. There's so much plastic waste that is leaking into our environment that we are consuming about 2,000 tiny pieces of plastic every week. And this is from a study, I think, from 2019. So this is already 4 years old. And it's not got less since then. You can also put those 2,000 tiny pieces of plastic into something more illustrative, like one credit card per week. So each week, you're chewing down a whole credit card. That's approximately 21 grams a month or quarter a kilo per year. So just imagine eating that on purpose, that each year for Christmas or for New Year's Eve, you get handed a quarter kilogram of plastic and this is your Christmas dinner. Have fun, enjoy it. This is how much plastic you're eating each and every year on average. So some people eat more, some people eat less, but you get the message. And that's besides our efforts to recycle all those plastic by separating them very nicely into the different trash bags that we have over there, or not using plastic straws in the first place. And there is a question, or at least some message online. Did I lose the audio again? Shore said it's a Jordan River. For Laura, I'm a computer scientist. I would like to defer that question to someone who might have a medical background. I do not feel comfortable making any statements about the harmfulness of plastic, microplastic for the human body, because that's not my field of expertise. I'm really sorry about that. To my knowledge, it's not very healthy, but this is as far as I would like to go with this statement. If there is someone in the audience, either online or offline, for the Q&A session, I'm very happy to bring this topic up again and that we have a discussion, but I'm not a medical person. Wall of plastic trash, the intuitive way being, okay, let's recycle all that plastic trash because this is what advertisements tell us. If you just take a Coca-Cola bottle or any other bottle and recycle it, everything is fine, you can still use it. The problem is that we're really, like similar to nuclear waste, we're really bad at managing our plastic stuff. This is unfortunately a figure from 2013. We struggle to get something more recent, but it illustrates the problem that we're facing. We're going to get into recycling a little bit more in the next slides. So this is the global flow of plastic packaging materials in 2013. So not all types of plastic, but rather only packaging plastic. And 98% is so-called virgin feedstock, so plastic coming from brand new input materials, not recycled. And that gives you back then, an annual production of 78 million tons. 32% of those 38 million tons leak into the environment, which just means some idiot throw it into a river or out of the window, or it's not really like putting it into any trash management system. So it pollutes our environment. 1/3, just a straight pollution. Another 40% go on landfills without being used any further. In other words, environmental pollution. Next, we have 14%, which are incinerated for energy use. Or in other words, there are environmental pollution. And then we have 14% remaining, which are collected for recycling purposes. Out of those 13%, another 4% are lost in processing. And then we have 8% going into so-called cascaded recycling and 2% going into closed loop recycling. Cascaded recycling often means I have some kind of high quality plastic and I can reuse it in a scenario where I need lower quality plastic. So one bottle can often not become yet another bottle of plastic. It has some kind of lower quality use case later on, which is still better than just throwing it into the ocean, but just the like getting you this intuition of just because I recycle that one bottle, it doesn't become automatically another bottle. I'm not saying that this is impossible because once again, I'm not an expert in the medical field. I'm also not an expert on plastic recycling or on polymer recycling. I'm not saying this is impossible, but often you have this problem of one bottle of plastic not becoming another bottle of plastic. With glass, this is less of a problem, or with various types of metal like aluminum or so, because it's easier to process them. So 2% closed loop recycling means from the 78 million tons, can you reuse 2% in closed loop recycling, and the other 98% have to be regenerated from virgin stock every fucking year. Even if this figure has gone down, I don't know, 10 or 15%, and now instead of 2%, we have 17%, or even 22, 32, or 42% within the last 10 years. This is still too much. The only acceptable answer would be we're now at 98% closed loop recycling, but we're not there yet. We're far away from that. We just didn't find a proper, like, there are numbers for that. We just didn't find a proper figure that breaks it down that nicely into the different streams that we now talked about. I hate this pointer. So, plastic being a problem. Plastic is going to be a problem for the foreseeable future. There are some forecasts from, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, that in 2050 there will be more plastic than fish in the ocean by weight. It's a little bit of an unfair fight in comparison from the perspective of fish, because we're not just adding plastic to the ocean, we're also removing quite a lot of fish from the ocean. So the fish is fighting a fight from two different sides, and yeah, quite sucks. From plastic, now a short detour to recycling in general. A lot of the research here at our university focuses heavily on recycling. How can we take what we have as trash and extract as much as resources as possible out of this trash? And this is not this is good. I'm not saying recycling is bad, but recycling often has some side effects or disadvantages that we tend to ignore because we want to hear the good story of recycling. That leads us back to the less I consume, the more sustainable it is. Because if I decide to consume that plastic bottle of apple juice, or whatever was in this other plastic bottle, or this fucking plastic bottle of coffee, it means someone has to produce that coffee. And even if I recycle it, recycling often requires a lot of energy. We just discussed how much is lost just in the collection process before I get to recycling. And then the recycling process itself is often very energy intensive. I can recycle aluminum more or less indefinitely, but it requires a lot of heat to do so. Same is true for glass. Plastic, I'm not a polymer expert, but it also requires a lot of energy to collect everything and then process it. Some materials cannot be recycled at all, or at least at all yet. Doesn't mean it's not possible in the future, but windmills are famous examples for being quite difficult to recycle. The battery packs of battery electric vehicles are a challenge in itself that a lot of companies are now addressing because it's a huge market and you can make a lot of money out of this. But right now, it's challenging. It doesn't scale well. Impurities are a challenge as well, because often you get different types of materials mixed together, even because of mis-sorting, that someone throw glass and aluminum in the same trash bin. Or if you take something like a complex product like my smartphone, it consists of, I don't know if it's hundreds of different input materials, but I guess at least 20, 30, 40 different input materials in just, I don't know, feels like bar of chocolate, like maybe 100 grams, maybe 200 grams. And if you want to get all of them out, you have to somehow crush it. If you crush it into very fine material, it's very difficult to figure out, okay, what is aluminum, what is gold, what is silver, what is plastic. If you do not crush it fine enough, you have chunks where gold and aluminum are in like one chunk. And how do you recycle that? How do you separate that? So it becomes quite difficult to separate those. So the impurities are a problem. It also often requires a lot of manual labor. If you go to recycling companies, you will see a lot of people like hand picking stuff in environments that are not really places that you want to work in and that are not really fostering your health. And it's also not very comfy to do that. And we also talked about this aspect of recycled material often having a lower quality than the initial input material. So there are more reasons that make recycling a challenging topic, but my main point being here, it gives you a false sense of safety. Just because you recycle doesn't mean that this is not having effects, negative effects on society and on our planet. Good, we'll get back to that from Alejandra because she gave some nice inputs on the medical perspective. So we're gonna push that to the Q&A session a little bit so that we do not have too many of those like name dropping things in our lecture. Good, I hate this pointer. Good. So long story short, I'm not saying you should stop recycling. Please recycle everything what you do because you already used that resource. I'm just saying it is not the best option. Actually, most of you digital technology students know Andreas Rausch. When I started working here, he often used this phrase of saying like recycling is the second worst option that we have. The worst one is just throwing it away, but recycling being the second worst option that we have. Consuming not at all or consuming less being much better. And if you have things that you can repair, you can share and so on and so on, we'll get to the circular economy concept in a while. Those are all much better than just recycle what you have. So throwing it away in hopes that it gets recycled is a very lazy and not the really most sustainable approach that you can have. It's better than throwing it into the ocean, but it's not the most sustainable thing you can do. Always more sustainable to consume only what you need to consume. And that gets us in time to our conclusion for today. So what did we talk about today? We wrapped up the last lecture a little bit because I was a little bit slow last week. But in this particular lecture, we talked about first the definition of sustainability. We also talked about some related concepts like the ecological footprint, biocapacities, and then we moved on to resources and environmental pollution. We talked about a few examples on environmental pollution, namely nuclear waste and plastic as just some use cases, and we also briefly talked about the limits to recycling. What's the definition of sustainability? You can raise your hand or I will point at people in the audience. Who's smart enough to now look up the slides? There's someone with a nice, really shiny purple outfit. So, definition of sustainability. Very, very good. You just saved the person behind you because you have a pink outfit and he has a purple outfit. So make sure you get a coffee from him. So making sure that you can meet your own needs without compromising the needs of future generations. Thank you very much. Good. The only thing left to do for this week is now exercise number 1. It's probably a little bit different than the exercise that you might have in your other courses because it's a little bit more practical. I can see already someone nodding, so someone already checked the exercise. What I would like you to do, get the largest jar that you have in your household, or in other ways also if you like a container, but like a jar would be nice. And you collect all the trash that you are producing in the upcoming week in that jar. Please discard bio-waste because it smells horrible. And then you count how many days you can fit into that big ass jar that you can find in your household. If you don't have a jar, but rather a box, that's also fine with me. We're talking about the purpose of this task here. How much can you fit in there? Please check how many days you can survive. Once your box or your jar is full, please submit the result of how many days you can make it via the link provided in the slides, but it's also in the exercise sheet. And then next week, it depends on how fast we can process your results. Next week or the week after, we're gonna have a look at the results that you provided us. And then we're also gonna put it in perspective because there have been people doing that before, not only in this course, but also outside this course. And then we'll see where you are standing. Thank you very much for attending this course. We will be back, let's say, in 10 minutes or so. So 10 minutes before 3 p.m. if this clock over there is not wrong. Yep. So in 50 minutes, 14:50, we're going to meet back without the recording in the same room. We're going to do a Q&A session. We're not going to talk about exercises because there haven't been exercises before. There were some inputs to be discussed in the chat.